All right, this video is to show how to reseal the leaking seals on a power steering pump. Power steering gear that comes out of a Mazda B2200 pickup truck. This came out of a 1990 B2200. Now, these steering gears, these trucks also had manual steering gears, and so that might be similar, but I don't know for sure. This one is the power steering unit. Also, this steering gear would be found in the B series trucks from 1987 up to 93, I believe. That would be the B2000, B2200, and B2600. All right, so I'm not expecting to win an award or do any kind of detailed video with this thing. My pitman arm shaft here was leaking, and so I needed to replace that seal. And I'm not, I've already taken this thing apart and sort of just put it back together, just so I can show you how it comes apart and goes back together. There's other videos about rebuilding power steering gears on the internet that are detailed and tell you about what snap ring pliers are and what lip seals and O-rings. I'll show you where those things go, but I'm assuming that you know what snap ring pliers are and how lip seals are supposed to go and O-rings and things like that. So I'm not going to get into all that crazy detail. When I wanted to do this, I could not find any video on the internet that showed me, this was from a B2200, this is how it comes apart. So I'm just going to do that basically and show you. So I probably should say that when I took this out of the vehicle, the first thing I did before I took it out of the vehicle was remove the pitman arm, and that's on there really good. You need a puller, and I needed heat, and it took a lot of persuasion. I almost quit, but I finally got it off of there. I would recommend separating the pitman arm from the shaft here before taking it off the vehicle, because the vehicle, when it's mounted to the vehicle frame, it actually helps to hold that steering gear in place really solid. So you can imagine if you take this thing off and try to put it in a bench vise or something, unless your bench is super duper solid, it's going to be a difficult task to get that off of there. So, and another thing would be to mark the shaft. I put a little dimple with a center punch here. Don't do it on the splines or on the threads, but in between there, and another one on the case, and then the same thing down here on the input shaft, just so that when you put it back together, you kind of put it back together in the same position that it came apart from. Also, coming off the vehicle, knocking the pitman arm shaft off, and that prevented me from having to use a pickle fork in the ball joint portion of the pitman arm, so I didn't have to damage that seal. That's all just going to go right back on the way it came off and didn't have to take that thing apart. So anyway, another thing I would recommend before you take it apart, I already have the lock nut for the lash adjustment removed here. If all you're doing on a steering gear is replacing leaking seals, and that's 9 times out of 10 all you can really do on these things anyway. If you've got damaged hard parts or whatever, you're just going to wind up having to take the thing in and get a rebuilt unit. And I went with the seal kit because I could have gotten a rebuilt unit, but they're running about $250 these days, and they're all special orders. So the seal kit was 30 bucks. It was it's an Edelman. Edelman is the brand name, number 8855. And it comes with all these seals here, a number of O-rings, dust seals, and all. It comes with a new lock ring, a lock nut for the lash adjuster, and also a new snap ring. Anyway, I've accounted for where the position of all these seals inside this unit, and so as I take it apart and show you how it comes apart, I'll show you where they go. You got car speakers over there for. Well, this is an interesting thing that I'll get to as we get further into this video, is why I've got these bearings. These are the bearings that came out of the worm shaft, and I've got them separated into 2 different groups here, and I'll tell you why when we get there. So anyway, when you're pulling this apart, you don't necessarily, if you didn't have a problem with your lash adjustment, then I recommend not really messing with it. But it doesn't matter if you do, you can reset it again. If you do decide to change your lash adjustment, when you might want to, like when this goes down on here like this, you can count how many threads are exposed above the nut, so that when you put it back together initially, you can kind of put it back together in the same position, and that way then do your final adjustments once it's in the vehicle. But you don't necessarily have to take that apart, but I did. So the first thing you want to do is remove this they call it a sector shaft. pitman arm shaft, output shaft, whatever you want. That's the main one that goes down through and connects to the pitman arm here. So on this particular gearbox, it's pretty easy to get that out of there. Again, this thing's going to be dry from fluid. I've already cleaned it up initially, and so it's not going to be gushing with fluid. When you take one of these things off the vehicle and set it down and take it apart for the first time, it's a lot of transmission fluid or power steering fluid or whatever is going to come out and spill everywhere. So you want to have it on a on some type of pan that contain all of that fluid. These are 14 millimeter nuts. There's 4 of them on the end of this output shaft cap, and just remove those. And once you get those 4 out, the shaft will just pull right out. You might need to tap the end of it here with a brass hammer, just to be careful not to damage the threads, but it should tap and come and pop right out like that. When it comes out, and right on out like so on. Now when you have this part out, really the only serviceable piece in here that has anything in the kit that you can do anything with is this O-ring right here. There's an O-ring right on the shaft right here. Use a seal pick and pull that off, and when you get it all cleaned up and lubricate the new seal, slide it down on there, then you're good to go with that seal. Very simple there. That's the output shaft. These are the teeth here that engage the little gear there that turn the wheels left and right. So I'll set that down over here. I'll set that down up here. Now you're holding the case here, and you've got this other component on the other end. This is the input shaft part, and again, there's 4 nuts, bolts actually, that go through the end of this cap right here, and you just move those 4 bolts. I only got one in there, kind of holding it together, again, because this is just sort of a mock-up, not an actual tear down. So then you're just gonna separate this. It'll just come right out, and like that, and now your case is pretty much empty. So you can clean this all up. There is, a matter of fact, there's a roller bearing down inside of the case here on this particular steering gear. I've seen some videos where they have 2 roller bearings, one here at the top and another one down here at the bottom. So this shaft would have a bearing race here and here. On this particular steering gear, the roller bearing race is here on the shaft, and there is no roller bearing down here. So this is not actually a shaft. There's a seal. The oil seal would go around here, but down inside of the case is actually a machined surface. So it's a really tight clearance here, but that's actually a machined surface to a machined surface with really tight clearances there. So you might want to check that for scoring or wear, but no roller bearing down there on this particular type of gearbox. So get the case all cleaned up and everything, and one of these, set that aside. Now here's the valve where the oil lines hook up to the valve right here. You saw how I pulled that out of the case, and when you're holding this, you can pull it. You can pull it like this, and you'll see actually you'll rotate it, and you'll see that you'll start to see the worm gear eventually. This is a little loose because I don't have the bearings in there, and then you see the worm shaft in there. But another thing here is this little cap. There's 2 Allen screws here, and if you remove those, I didn't remove mine initially. I just rotated this and pulled it all the way out like so. And when you rotate this shaft and you pull this all the way out, what'll happen is all of these bearings that are supposed to be wrapped around this worm gear, and they go up through a little loop here, I'll show you that in a second, they'll all fall out and they'll all be down inside of there. So then you just take a magnet and suck them all out of there, and they get away from you easy, so you make sure you want to put them on something like a magnet. And now here's the trick thing, is that these bearings, I counted the ones that came out of this gear, and there's a total of 30 ball bearings that came out of this gear here. And it's interesting because they're not all the same size. Half of them are one size and half of them are a tiny bit smaller. Yep, there's like, I think 5.5 millimeter on 15 of them, and 5.55 millimeter on the other 15. Yes, so it's a 0.05 difference in half of them. And in order for this thing to work properly, when you put it back together, as you install the bearings in through the cap here, you got to drop them in alternating in size, bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller, and that's how they're supposed to go back together. So anyway, pull. You don't want to do like I did and pull it out that way. Before you undo this, you can also just take the cap off. When you pull this cap off of here, and it's just a couple of, I've got these already loosened up, and it's not too difficult to get apart. There's a 5mm Allen key. That'll come off, and you see this little pipe thing here. This little pipe thing, when you pull this up off of here, if you don't already pull it out of there, you'll find that there may be some bearings inside of there, right? And they'll fall out. Don't lose them, right? So and this thing splits, and there's two pieces of that right there, right? There's two little pieces, like a U-shaped little metal tube. It goes back together like this. So this is how you put it back together anyway. When you're reassembling it, you take the bearings and you drop them in here one at a time, and sort of rotate it like that to get them in, and then drop another bearing in and rotate it and drop another bearing in and wiggle it around until you get them all full. And they're wrapping around the worm gear and coming back up through the this cylinder here, and then they you can't put any more in there because they're coming up to the top. That's where the little tube comes in here. You got this half U-shaped tube, and you'll take the bearings, the remaining bearings, and set them inside of this tube like this, and then put a little grease on each side there that'll hold them in place, and then you'll put the other piece back on top of it, and then you could take this piece, slide it back down into the worm cylinder. So I'll get it in here like that, but to here. You'll get that back down in there with the bearings all in there. So now you got them all, the bearings in there wrapped around the worm gear, alternating in size. Then you slap the cap back down on there. And that's how you would put that back together. So let me back up just a little bit. Pull this back out. So it's stuck in there. All right, there you go. You'll have this out. There's. I already took it off of here. Right here, there's an O-ring and a nylon seal. So here's the nylon seal that I took off. I actually broke it when I took it apart, but that on this particular cylinder here, you'll find in the kit there's a nylon. There's the new nylon right there, and there's the O-ring. So the O-ring goes in that slot first, and then the nylon goes over top of it. And so, O-rings, if they're not, super duper frozen, you can usually manipulate them pretty easily and get them in position and make sure just they're oiled up so that you don't get scorn or whatever. But this nylon ring, the new nylon ring, it doesn't look like it's going to behave just like an O-ring, because it's a lot more rigid material. So this I plan on soaking in some really hot water before I go to put this back together. Anyway, it'll be the proper size O-ring out of the kit, whichever one of these O-rings it is goes on there first. Then the nylon seal will go over top of that, and then also so there's nothing else you can do in this piece right here. They've got a nut that you can take off to I guess that's for a different way that the factory assembled it, but I'm not going to do it that way. This piece here, also there's an O-ring here. That O-ring seals it into the case. Right? This thing goes back together. There aren't any gaskets. All right, it's just all O-rings. This right here seals this assembly together in the case, and same thing on the output shaft. The O-ring right there will seal it into the case and keep the fluid in. This valve component here also has a spot for an O-ring. There's a small O-ring that goes there and right here, and on the case you can see the hole where it lines up, and there'll be a small O-ring there, and that's that little O-ring got floating around here somewhere in the kit. There it is right there, that little guy right there. So this upper part right here has some seals in it too. There's a which one is it right? It's that guy right there. It just goes right down in there, and you would just use a socket and then gently tap it into position. Then on top of that would go, where is it? It's falling inside of there. On top of that would go this dust seal, and all that's just a dust seal to keep dirt from getting in there and fouling the seal up. And then goes a snap ring, and that what holds the seal, the dust seal, in place. This inside of this component, I'm not sure what's in there on this particular type. I can see some bearings moving around in there. I tried to take this lock ring off. I gave it a little effort, and it really wasn't wanting to budge, so I decided to abandon that. And also mainly because this, when I took this apart, it was really clean. It wasn't really dirty at all inside. It just had a bad seal. But I decided, when I discovered there aren't any replacement parts, I had already accounted for all of the replacement parts in the kit, so I wasn't any need for me to take this apart, provided it, the steering gear was functioning properly, and there's no parts in there that I have that I can replace, so I'm not even going to bother, taking that apart. So then, anyway, I just showed you how you get the new seal and the dust boot and the snap ring on that piece, new O-ring right there. On the case, this is the actual seal that was leaking for me. Is this seal down in here, and that's the seal that rides at the bottom of the output shaft here. That was leaking pretty bad, and so I've seen on the internet some guys do some videos where they replace that seal with the power steering gear all assembled. They figured out a way to go in there and get a little pick or a little hole in it, and then just put a screw in there and kind of pull it out. I can tell you right now, you're not going to be able to do that on this type of steering gear. In order to replace this seal right here for the bottom of the output shaft, you're going to have to take it apart. You don't have to take all of this apart, but you definitely at least have to take the output shaft out. That was that first step, because this seal is recessed down inside of there under this ridge here. There's just no way to pull that apart with this component, let alone get a new one in there and expect it to be in there properly. It just ain't going to happen. So anyway, so then once you get your new seal in here, and your new O-rings on your other components there, it's pretty straightforward as far as putting it back together, just the same way it kind of came apart. This would be the first step for putting it back together, would be sliding the I'm not really sure what this is called, but it's just the component that goes over the worm gear. That's going to go inside of there, and you're gonna feed these bearings in there. I'm not going to take the time and do it all, but you'll take these bearings and alternate them by size. Remember, half of them are 0.05 millimeters smaller than the other. Alternate them, big, large, back until you get them all around in there, and then you'll have these components with the bearings, with the remaining bearings in them. Cap them off. Got the grease in there to hold them in place. Slap them down inside of there like that. Get your cap. Your cap's going to go down on there like that. Then you'll tighten these up. And then this goes back into the case. Let me move this back a little bit here. Got your new O-rings on there, new O-ring followed by the nylon on top of it. And again, guys, I'm not, I'm assuming anybody who takes this thing out of the vehicle and is intent on disassembling it and replacing it themselves already knows a fairly good amount of how to deal with, lip seals and O-rings and all those kinds of things. So you're going to have to use, some of your own knowledge and common sense about this. I just wanted to show, this is how this particular type of gearbox sort of comes apart and goes back together. And the ones on the internet for the Saginaw type gearing boxes and the other ones, the Toyota, they're not all the same. They're very similar in how they function, but they don't all the same. It's interesting that you'll find, if you look at all those videos, that one type of gearbox has some of the features of this one, and then there's a different type of gearbox that has the other sort of features. So they all sort of a little bit different in their unique ways, but basically, the same sort of function. All right, so to get this one back in place, we make sure that we've got the the O-ring in place here, and we'll put a little grease on there that we would hold that O-ring in place, and then we're going to slide this back in there and make sure the O-ring lines up with that hole there. And the other thing that you want to line up too when you're putting this back in initially is this gear, this portion of the gear here, because that's what's going to engage with the steering output shaft. And so that's going to go in, and we want this facing this way up to that hole there. So we'll slide that in like that, and we've got the O-ring oil patches lined up, and it's just going to sort of pop right back together. This is the O-ring There it goes. All right, now I'm just going to put one nut in there gently to kind of hold that in place for me while I... There you go. Now, and then it's you're going to line up the output shaft. Again, you see you got your gear in there, and that's what's going to go when the steering shaft turns this. That's going to be moving this back and forth like that. So I get this in there, and you're going to line that up. And you remember, you know, you mark this thing, and so you're going to have it these marks on the shafts in the case lined up with the case in the shaft here when you reassemble this. So that's just going to go right back in. I probably need to wind up finagling this a little bit. I had it back together earlier, but anyway, pull that back out. Okay, I figured out my challenge there was it was actually the machined portion of the shaft, and in the case it's a very tight tolerance that I was telling you about before. That's difficult to get in, so you just got to get it lined up right with the splines there. And once you get to that point, you just got to rotate it around like this, and then wiggle it back and forth a little bit, and then it'll come together. And you get it straight on down to the seal. Tap it into place. Tighten up your nuts, and that's basically it. So not going crazy on every little detail, but just a basic way this thing comes apart and goes back together. All right.